Have you finished the video yet? Hey.
Out of all the Beelze eggs that we could use, Starter Pagu is the most proactive, which is a theme you'll see in this deck a lot. Milling 2 on deletion is honestly about as good as we could realistically ask, especially with how burst milly we are and how often our things just kind of die. Speaking of burst milling, BT2 imp mills 3 on deletion. Wow, that's so cool. That means it's 5 cards with the Pagumon. Just keep in mind that it's 2 separate triggers. It's a little important, especially with the EX-02 Beelze, because if you mill with the first trigger, you mill the Beelze, and then it doesn't have a target, and you're like, oh, but I want to play one, and then you play the one that's on the field. That's all fine and cool, except if you have one of the mill triggers that didn't go off. It doesn't go off because inheritable. It's still the Impmon's ability, even though it's the Pagumon's inheritable because it's inheriting it to the Imp. But never mind. Good card. Burst mills. Very good. EX-02 Dimp is kind of similar, very value trainy. Whoa, on play it's a searcher, you grab a Beelze and an Iron Mako, and when it's milled out of the deck, you get to mill 3 more cards. Unless it's milled out of the deck by an EX-02 Imp, so you can't just loop them out of being milled from each other. But also, if you have one on the field and it has the Pagu inheritable that mills 2, it doesn't trigger off of that, because inheritables put it on the Digimon that's on top. And it's not like a weird trigger necessarily, it's just something you don't really think about until decks like this kind of force you to be like, oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. With us rumored to not be getting Security Impmon until BT12, specifically because Bandai fucking hates me, we have to run for the BT6 Imp. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing though, especially with how toolboxy our Beelzemons are. It's nice to be able to have some control over where they are, whether it be in your hand, in your trash, or... It's also important to note that the Blast Mode and the BT10 Beelzemon are not a 7 Great Demon Lord, so you can just trash it with this. It's especially useful for the Blast Mode, because obviously you want that in trash with your Iron Mako, but if you're trying to set up for Balmon and you just want to get a Beelze in the trash, that's a pretty solid way to do it. Promo Wizardmon is a card that I am reluctant to run right now. Being able to put a card from your hand on top of your deck is situationally very good, but on its own, Wizardmon doesn't do anything. Down the line with future support, I think this card gets kind of insane, especially with the X antibody and all that crazy stuff, and actually the egg caring about his type. But as of right now, we run him because when he's milled, he gains a memory, and things happening when they're milled make my brain go burr. Dobermon and Eismon are purely just value cards, but they're really good value cards. Dobermon mills us 3 and gets us pretty much anything we need out of our trash. And then Eismon just cleans out our hand really well, which is very good, especially because we have a tendency of getting cluttered with Beelze and Blast modes and stuff that we really don't need in our hand until later, or just generally want in our trash. And on top of that, it's good to be able to have cards that you actually need in your hand. And I feel like Eismon is just one of those cards that a lot of people don't really think about for Beelze because it doesn't say mill a card on it. Okay, so I know I have 2 cards on the screen right now, but realistically, you're only really running one of these 2. So Soulmon is pretty good because obviously, we mill a lot, so gaining a memory off of that is really good, especially with the Balmon. It would be gaining us a memory on swing, plus any memory would gain off of milling the specific cards that gain us memory. It's very value-y, very kind of greedy, but I like it kind of deals. Realistically, you probably want to go with the blocker just because it's 1 to Evo, which is really good into turboing into ball, but also just having blockers comes up a lot. It's not as big as it was when the cross art was running around, but it is still big enough with these decks that go wide that it comes up. It's nice to just have that option to be able to throw out a blocker. So straight up, there's no way around it. You need to run at least 1 Kaiser Leo. I'd personally rather run 2, but the greater Beelze community would circumcise me a second time if I didn't say to run at least 1 Genkaku promote. There's a theoretical world where your opponent is down to 0 security, and you somehow manage to mill a Beelzemon to play out an Impmon, and then you can just Evo into Genkaku for game, and honestly, I can confidently say this shit has never happened in my entire life, and y'all are fucking wild, but to each their own, I guess. Oh, Balmon, how I both love and hate you. So, let's talk about this guy. So, let's talk about Balmon. So, Balmon is pretty good. When attacking, mill top 3 cards of your deck, and then on deletion, if you have 10 or more cards in trash, play a free Beelzemon on your trash. That's fucking sick. There's a slight discrepancy with that though. So let's say you got your Pagumon, and then you evolve to Impmon, and then do just Wizardmon, just because it's what I got, and then you go into Balmon. So let's say, theoretically, that this is all you've done. You did all this in the back, and then you raise up, and you're ready to swing your Balmon. So you'll swing your Balmon, we'll pretend like we don't really have anything to do with Wizardmon yet. We'll mill our 3. It's 1, 2, 3. Pretty good. We even gained a memory, and we had a Beelze. That's pretty good. So let's say it dies in security here, so we're going to do our Pokemon trigger first because we want as many dudes in the trash as possible. So you can go 1, 2, and then on deletion, since this is considered deleted, we have 9 cards in trash. So that's a problem for a few reasons. So there's obviously ways around it, but the biggest real issue is that so you need 1 more card in trash. So realistically, it's like if your opponent hits 1 card as security, you're good to go. If you have an Iron Mako on the field before you do your swing, like you do swing and then you trigger the Iron Mako to mill an additional card, then you're good. But assuming that that's assuming that it dies. If it doesn't die, then you're good to just Deathclaw it, and that puts you at 10 cards with the Deathclaw. Alternatively, if you have exactly the promo Wizardmon underneath of it, you could throw the EX-Impmon on top of your deck so that, you know, you mill your 3. Presumably, it would look like, so throwing the Impmon on top, you would mill top 1, 2, and then 3. And then, because we milled the Impmon, you mill an additional 1, 2, 3, and I was like, whoa, we gained a memory, we did some cool shit. And then it dies, we mill 1, 2, and then deletion trigger. That Impmon would also trigger, but just for the sake of showing off, it's like, yeah, we have enough cards to be able to play out of Beelzemon now. So it's like there's very good and very heartbreaking aspects of Balmon. Overall, I think it's a really good design space, but I think that the way the math works out just makes it a little awkward. But nonetheless, still incredibly important to the ebb and flow of the deck, especially just the value you get, because you could, especially with like stuff like Lord Bloom existing, like you raise up, you swing over one of their dudes, and even if you're trading with a 5, you're potentially still walking out with a level 6 on the field. But yeah. Another way you can get Balmon to 10 cards in trash is if you just use a Kaiser Leo or the Kinkaku promote to EVA over your 4, so you have a taller stack. I forgot to say that in the video, and Hindsight's 2020, woo! Oh boy, it's daddy time. EX-2 Beelze is a lot more useful this time than he was in our last list because of, well, straight up because of Balmon. He can either play him outright or just Evo into him. So we're getting the actual mills and pop effects off of him, potentially, and then we still get the value that we were running him before for, which is just playing Impmons when he's milled out of our deck. Warp Beelze is still very good, don't get me wrong, but not as relied on as our last version was, because of Balmon. A lot of our time we're using him after we do our Balmon shenanigans. He's kind of like our, oh shit, our first Beelze died, well, here's another one, deal with it kind of deal. Because we're not relying on it as much, we're not really running win rate, like, at all. It's just not as impactful. It's just not worth the slots that are very quickly dwindling with all these cards that we need to be running more and more of. And then we have BT10 Beelze. He's cute, I guess. On play, you can mill 3 and then pop a couple bodies, maybe. But, like, realistically, the biggest reason we're playing him is because of his inheritable. Just getting a Jack Raid at the end of attack with our blast mode is so impactful and super important, especially for setting up for lethal afterwards, because that was like the biggest issue we had before, was just not being able to set up lethal very easily. After we do our blast mode, we get our opponent down to 0 security, and then we were kind of just, if our opponent dealt with our board, then we just had nothing to do. The jack raid effect kind of gives us a little more leniency of things that we can do with our turn before we have to pass, and give our opponent a little more things that they have to deal with before we hopefully kill them in the crackback smile. Speaking of cards that are going to be replaced in the future, blast mode is our kill big tower, then erase security button. Especially being able to go into for 3 with Iron Mako is insane, and assuming our opponent can't recover from this or just kill us outright on the crackback, yeah, we win those games. We win those games every time if they don't have the answer. And because the Beelze deck wasn't expensive enough, we play a single Death X. Seriously though, it's a really good way to slow down wide rushy decks like Bloom, Imperial, and Commandramon. It's despite what a lot of more casual people will say, is not a you can't play the game anymore card. It's just a slowdown card, and I think it's very healthy for the game. And I think that a lot of people who want to ban are just very salty. Please don't ban this card, Bandai. Please, God, we need more answers for decks in the meta. God, please. Iron Mako, Memory Tamer. Let's just go into blast mode for cheap. Obvious include. Come on, guys. Don't be stupid. Because I'm psychic and I already know that comments will be flooding asking why I'm not running Mist Mem Boost, it's because we run Jack Raid, because I think it's a more proactive card, especially out of security, basically being a Hammer Spark, and playing it out of hand immediately is, at least in my opinion, a little bit better than having to play an option that does a little bit for memory later, when you can just have the memory and whenever you need it in your hand. Especially when it's a 3 cost option. That it's fine, like milling 2 is fine, but it's like for 3 memory you can be doing so much more. Deathslinger kills about 90% of everything with how much we mill, especially, and it doesn't cost a million memory like Death the Cannon, plus it gains a memory when it's milled. Another obvious include. That's what I wrote down in the script. I think it's important to say also that I don't think Death the Cannon is a good card, like, at all. I think that it being 8 memory is a lot. I mean, I think we're kind of past the point where Gaia Force is good, and it being able to go to your hand when it's milled is, like, fine, but, like, it also, if you mill that early and you need to get your numbers up, then you're not really getting your numbers up. You're not really getting anything out of it either. Overall, I think just paying 4 for a card that's better later is better than a flat 8 kill anything, especially because there's not a lot that Deathslinger doesn't just kill most of the time. The Calling from the Darkness limit did slightly hurt our deck, I guess, but ultimately, I mean, we went from 2 Calling to 1 Deathclaw to 1 Calling, 2 Deathclaw, which was honestly probably going to happen anyway, just because of how popular Pillamon and Pomumon are getting, specifically to beat Bloomlord, but it does inadvertently hurt us a lot. Plus, just memory blockers can be kind of a pain, and Bloomlord has a tendency of running a lot of floodgates that we don't like. And this is the full deck. Like I said earlier in the video, those Solmons could very easily become Devimon, and the one of Kinkaku promote could even easier become a Kaiser Leo. But yeah, this is what I've personally been rolling around with. Like, obviously, make adjustments to your own playstyle. I know that this deck is a little wonky on the ratios, but I like having the slightly greedier list. But yeah, let me know what you all thought of this video style compared to the first Beelzemon deck list. Because if you hate this, I won't do it. I'll go back to the old way. And frankly, the old way was easier. But I don't know. I thought it would be fun to try this more higher effort type of video and see what y'all thought. But yeah.
I got it on my thumb.